Okay, we are officially live streaming. Woohoo! And before we officially get started, I wanted to invite Dina Snyder, our Director of Finance and Operations, to just greet everyone and thank you for being here. And then I'll share the slide deck and we'll jump in and get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see everyone here. And I get very excited at the fact that I'm starting to recognize more and more of the faces, so you're becoming very familiar to me, and our partnership is continuing. So thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any questions, we'll be able to answer them at the end, but I'm glad you all were able to make it today.
Thank you, Dina. And with that, I'll start our presentation. This is our August mandatory summer investment partners training, all about showcasing and communicating impact. And our purpose of today is to kind of really talk about that. I'm going to say that third piece of your final report, which is when we want you to share a testimonial and potentially 3 high quality photos that kind of demonstrate your organization's summer impact. So what we want to talk about today in this training is just the art of storytelling in general. How do you actually supercharge that story with visuals? What are the types of things that you should be looking for? We're going to talk a little bit about how to level up with video production, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. Now, I put in here level up with video production. That is not a requirement of our summer investment partners. The contracts that you have, all you need to do is submit the 3 photos that we talked about. But because we're talking about storytelling, we really hope that you'll use this opportunity to not only communicate impact related to the summer funding that you received from CSC Leon, but how you might be able to use this particular story to amplify the work that you're doing in the community to a broader audience, whether that is to increase your own fundraising goals or to tell to kind of report it out to other folks that are interested. Maybe you want to use it in your annual report. We hope that while we take you through this journey of the art of storytelling, that it not only satisfies the grant requirement from our end, but also communicates to you directly or is utilized by you directly in other means, which is why we encourage, if you want, to take it to that next level of creating a video. And we just want to provide some resources and information about what makes a quality testimonial video versus just the written story and those high quality photos. Again, I want to encourage everyone to use the chat function while we move forward to drop questions in, and then we'll come back at the end and we'll address some of those questions. They can be specific to the actual contract that you have with us, or it can just be in general about communications and marketing in general. And we will do our best to answer. Both myself and Executive Director, Ms. Sika Rose Green, have quite an extensive history in this field. And so feel free to ask any additional questions just in general about storytelling, photography, video production, etc. So with that, I'll get started. We're going to start with the art of storytelling. So like any good story, what you really want to think about in creating a testimonial, any type of pitch, whatever it might be, is that it starts with a character. That might be a family that you served, a graduate of your program. It might even be an employee who has kind of gone on a journey over the summer and has experienced new and different things. But in essence, to kind of give that arc of any story, whether it's a 3-minute testimonial or a 3-hour movie that you're going to watch on TV, typically it always starts with a character. And you want to have, from the audience perspective or your reader or your viewer, someone to kind of follow. It gives your viewer someone to identify with and to care about. It's who they hope for, they fear for, and they cheer for. So that's really what you want to kind of first think about, is with that impact story that you're sharing with us, is who is it that you're going to be highlighting and following. The second piece of storytelling is what I like to call just kind of sharing your goals. And it's not your goals as an organization or a mission, but it's the goals of the individual, of your character, right? Your main character should have some sort of desire or goal that's driving them forward. Perhaps it's why they sought services with your organization in the first place. Maybe it was the call to action of whatever your summer programming was that got their attention. Maybe they have previous experiences in a particular field or with a particular circumstance that they wanted and needed help addressing. But there's usually typically something that is connecting your character to the mission of your organization. Now, every family that you might choose to highlight in a testimonial, I'm sure has multiple goals, but in this, you do want to kind of align that goal really to the mission and vision of your organization, specifically for a summer success story. What were they kind of seeking or starting out at the beginning of services with you, and what might they have been pursuing as they continued forward? So that kind of brings us to this idea of what I call exposing the conflict. So you have your character, you have what's kind of propelling them forward. Well, what's standing in the way of that family from achieving the goal? So in traditional storytelling, the conflict would be, the villain to your protagonist. This is the obstacle to which your organization is seeking to defeat or overcome by helping your character kind of move through that. So it's almost what one could say that whatever their obstacle is, that's usually also very aligned with your mission. So have your character, you have kind of this goal that's driving them forward, that's mission oriented to what you do, and you have this conflict that's also aligned with the services that you are providing. The next kind of phase, and again, this storytelling could be for any testimonial, for any story that you're writing. If your child, like mine, is starting ENC 1101 this semester, this will be very helpful even in writing the essays that I'm sure that he's going to be faced with. But this fourth phase of storytelling is describing the action. So this is the sword fight, or the moment when the Wicked Witch is defeated, the climax of the story when the main character faces the conflict and with help from your organization is successful in overcoming it. So kind of thinking through, really kind of capturing that story. If it hadn't been for the action that they took by participating in your program and being equipped with the resources or knowledge or experiences that your program helped provide to your character, they would not have been able to overcome that or be successful. And usually this is kind of like where most stories end, right? You have your plot, you've had your climax, you've kind of said everything. And what oftentimes we forget to include is this kind of fifth piece of storytelling for nonprofits, especially, is ending with impact. And at the beginning of this, we said that we wanted to talk with you about how do you communicate impact? How do you showcase impact? And this impact message is kind of like your CTA, your call to action. How is this success story any different from a traditional happy ending, right? So if you've ever been to the movies, you've had the big conflict, you've had the big whatever, and then there's usually that kind of last scene, that epilogue, if you will, that kind of helps tie everything up with a nice, neat little bow. In storytelling for nonprofits, it's going to be kind of slightly different, because this is where you want to highlight the partners that made the success story of your main character possible, right? We know that CSC Leon, that we're just one of the partners, right? We provided a little bit of funding, but this was an expansion program. And reading all of your monthly reports, we're seeing that there's absolutely multiple partners at the table. Some of you were designed specifically that way and are actually working in partnership with those various entities. And some of you have kind of naturally discovered additional partners that are in your service area, your target area. And we're also seeing new partnerships bubble up. And I'm already hearing conversations about new events and projects that are going to be starting in September because of these newfound partnerships. So this kind of ending with impact truly is kind of like that drop the mic moment of kind of like, why is it important? But know that that moment might not be solely the responsibility of your organization, but it's an opportunity for you to leverage and highlight partnerships that made it possible. This is also a really great point that you'll be able to kind of turn your story into any need or purpose that you might need it for. If you were writing a story, impact story for an annual report, for example, it could be justifying an expense, or maybe it's for one of your own calls to action to leverage funds in a fundraising campaign. This is where contributors see, wow, if with your help or with their help, they would be able to maybe support more success stories like this. So this is where you're drawing it all together of why this is important to our community and really highlighting those partners. So just kind of seeing all 5 steps together, I just want to reiterate that storytelling is a powerful tool to create an emotional connection between the cause of your organization and truly any audience, whether it's report writing for us or the greater community that we would potentially be able to share this out with. And that is certainly our goal. Oftentimes when you're creating a written narrative, nonprofits tend to kind of rely on policy speak, the facts, ma'am, just the facts, and the kind of just step by step by step. And we sometimes kind of get caught up in some of that jargon. The other flip side of that is, desperate appeals for funding, where you almost dress it up too much. And for what we're looking for, it's somewhere in the middle, right? That the policy speak, the kind of the jargony stuff usually lacks the emotional appeal, and it's pretty easy to ignore. So that might be like just standard report writing. On the other end of the spectrum, right, those desperate appeals for funding might convey it like it's too emotional, or the connection specifically to your organization's sense of competence could be called into question if you don't tell the arc in the right way. And so sometimes an emotional appeal, I joke around about the ASPCA, and you might be a contributor to the ASPCA, but I think this is a great example. When I see the commercials of all of like the skinny dogs and the skinny cats and everything's like, it's so emotional for me that I don't want to engage with it, and I turn it off, and I write my checks, and I definitely have my own sense of philanthropy and the organizations that I support. But sometimes if something's too emotional for a particular audience, they might just look the other way. Or if you're displaying it on social media, they might just scroll through, or if it's in a report, they might just turn the page. Because it might be so overwhelming or so emotional that there's not a real sense that the audience, the viewer, the reader can do anything about it, and that they're not sure that your organization can either. So you're really shooting for something in the middle. And that's really where the most effective storytelling will land, when it's effective and kind of subtle about how you communicate, why your organization exists, what it does, and where exactly any type of contribution or support or volunteerism or the purpose, like what it actually goes to. I want to kind of pause there, because something I said really reminds me of kind of this next step in our agenda about how to kind of supercharge your story. In the same example of the ASPCA, usually when you think of those written appeals, or they might, if you listen to those commercials, you'll hear the success story of what individuals have, or what the ASPCA has accomplished with funding and with support from different folks. But those visuals certainly play a role in its success. So that's what we like to say, supercharging your story with visuals. Chances are, looking at this image, you might think of something. It might remind you of something. It might remind you of a movie. The color scheme might evoke some sort of kind of murky or dark emotion. Seeing the rings, maybe if you're married, this might mean something to you. If you're divorced, it might mean something to you. If you are a Hobbit fan, this might mean something to you. Or Lord of the Rings, right? thinking through what a visual can do to help your story is a key way to really draw a reader in, whether, again, it's in a report, it's on a website, it's in an e-campaign, it's on social media, is that visuals can be very, very effective in keeping your viewer engaged. And so I want to go through just 5 kind of quick tips, if you will, that are all about how to supercharge your story with visuals. And the first one is knowing your brand. Clearly, I'm Millie's wife, say clearly. I'm hoping that the image before, right, that maybe it resonates with you at some deeper emotional level just in your personal life, but probably, unless maybe you're a preacher or someone who performs Masters of Ceremonies, or maybe it's a book club and you just finished Lord of the Rings, probably that image is not the one that you're going to want to use in sharing your success stories or communicating your impact. So you want to keep in mind, what is your organization's, what I say, your brand or your mission. So don't just choose an image because it's pretty or funny or cool or unusual. Like you're like, oh, we see this all the time on social media, clickbait, right now on websites. You're like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And you click into it and you're like, wait, what does this have anything to do with the visual that I just saw? So we want to start with definitely know your brand or your mission. And so that the visual that you're going to pick to go with your story, those visuals need to tie into your organization somehow. They need to be relevant. So you want to consider, does it fit with the mission? Does it enhance the message of the story, that ending with impact? It is addressing with that? Does it kind of fit with the overall tone? Lighting can be a huge impact for that. Or say the whole purposes of your summer program might have been doing some sort of summer activities always during the day, right? So maybe choosing something in the evening, if that was never part of your service plan, might not coincide with how you describe the services that you provided. So that's something to think about. The other thing when we talk about kind of tone is, what is the kind of reaction that you want from your audience? It might be pure jubilation. It might be a feeling of pride. It might be a feeling of, I need to whip out my checkbook and donate. Maybe that's what it is. But think through the type of reaction that you want to elicit from your audience, and then kind of think through, will this image, right? Will this image do that job? Hopefully that's going to become, I'm going to start with that, because as we go through some of the other specifications for how to add quality visuals for your story, it should tie in even more. The second thing is kind of creating that emotional connection. So I briefly touched on that. You want that image to support your story, evoke a feeling, and if it doesn't, then don't use it, right? Keep searching for the best solution, not necessarily the quickest one. When you're also thinking of images, you want to consider something that's called the rule of thirds. So for those of you who might be in the communications and marketing field or have any type of background in that, the rule of thirds, what that is, it's a well-known photographic technique which kind of breaks an image into a 9x9 square. So I'm going to show an example. And the technique kind of places points of interest in the intersections or along those lines. Studies have shown that when viewing images that apply the rule of thirds, that people's eyes tend to head for those natural intersections in the grid, rather than kind of in the dead center. So I know some of us think, well, like especially on social media, right? Like taking a selfie, and you usually kind of put yourself right in the middle. That actually turns out that the more successful images still have it kind of slightly off, or creating some sort of negative space or clear space around the focal point of who you're trying to show, what you're trying to showcase, or who you're trying to showcase. The other thing is that you want kind of clean and decluttered photos with, and like I said, with that negative space kind of surrounding them, as opposed to busy photos. Oftentimes we host events, and it's like we want to get in, we want to somehow communicate the impact, or like the size of the crowd, right? And so you try to create it so that you're capturing as many people as possible. But what that ends up doing is that it feels generic. It feels like it's so big that you can't really see the details of anything. And that's kind of like this next rule of avoiding the handshake is kind of applies to this. So real life photography is always preferred to stock photography, but we don't want something that's so generic that you can't really tell what's happening or like who it is. You also don't want something that's posed or faked, right? So what happens if you and your organization or you and your team, you typically go out, maybe it's a fun, like quick selfie, which is great. But oftentimes what ends up happening is that you get a group of people together and you take a picture. So I succumbed to this past Friday. Members of our team joined the Department of Children and Families at their Fueling Futures networking session. And at the end of it, what did we all do? We all got together and we all smiled for the camera. That's a great thing maybe for an annual report, but it doesn't communicate a story. It doesn't show what happened at the event or any of that. So typically you want to avoid the handshake. Yes, it's okay to get those, especially for documentation purposes. But as you're communicating your story, you want to try to find a moment that stands out to focus on. Kind of you want to capture the moment in the moment. So another example, again, our team had the opportunity to go and enjoy a tour of one of the 211 Big Bins, Books, Blocks, and I got it wrong. Books, Blocks, and Books. Blocks, Books, and oh goodness, I'm getting it totally wrong. I see you mouthing the words, Jacinta, but you'll have to drop it in the chat. But we were there and these kids are running around, they're playing with blocks, they are picking up hula hoops. And so capturing the moments with the appropriate photo release, of course, of the kids playing is communicating a whole lot more than a couple of staff members standing behind a table. Capturing that moment, which one of the ones that we captured the other day we loved was a team member talking to a mom and like giving a high five to the kid. Capturing those kind of more in the moment moments convey a lot more, and they draw out that emotional connection more so than something that's a little bit more on the posed side of things. And the last piece of kind of advice or a tip trick for how to supercharge your story with visuals is this concept of quality over quantity. Now, this is something that you could consider not only for the report, but also for kind of social media posts and your personal and professional lives. Oftentimes, right? Okay, maybe my mother is the only person who does this, but she will go to her grandson's birthday party and she will take like 95 pictures. And all 95 pictures will get posted up onto her social media feed, right? And fortunately, it's not like one post per photo, but like she's just got one post with like 95 pictures, and you find yourself scrolling through them. They're not quality. There's like repeats of things, and there's like lots of multiple stuff like that. We get it, right? Because you want to capture the right shot of the kid actually looking at you, or the hand not in motion, or whatever it might be. That's why we really want to impress upon you, though, when you make the post or when what you submit, think quality over quantity. Less absolutely is more, and we will preach it. We will preach that concept again here. We absolutely love it when a partner wants to share a plethora of photos, because that means that they were thinking about taking photos, and that's fantastic. But let us be clear, when we say that we only want 3 to 5 with your report, we only want 3 to 5 with your report. You might have held 8 events and you like, oh, I have 3 to 5 for each event. We don't want 3 to 5 for each event. We want 3 to 5 for the entire final report, and think quality over quantity. Now, all of these things that I've just shared absolutely also apply if and when you're ready to take your storytelling into video production. Like great content on any platform can usually make you say, wow, that's really interesting. But there's certain times when you want to capture the attention of your audience in a different way, a little bit more quickly, and you want to keep them engaged. And those are those times that you might want to consider leveling up your testimonial story with video. Again, this is not required for the purposes of CSC Leon contract, but we do want to share just some kind of tips of how you can use the content that you've created in a bigger and better way. Videos don't have to be, a lot of times people think, oh, I need to hire a videographer, I need to do this, but they don't have to actually be overly produced to be effective, but they still should follow what we discussed previously in terms of maintaining that storyline. Again, you want to draw that viewer in it and take them on the same emotional journey that your written version of the story sought to. So that same story arc that we talked about, ending with impact, all of that absolutely applies. But then the question you're going to say is when and where, right, are you want to use this video? Because that is going to really indicate who do you want to be speaking in the video, or is it speaking in the video? Is it a person on camera? Is it showing a scene? All of that. So really, and I'm going to say pick a platform. And what I mean by that is this. If you truly want to communicate an impact story for the purposes of for fundraising, then think through where and when your target audience might see that video for fundraising. Is it going to be on an email distribution that you have? Is it going to be on social media? Or is your impact story part of like an annual event? I know, for example, I just saw an advertisement for the United Way annual meeting that's coming up in September. I think United Partners for Human Services has their annual meeting coming up in September. The Greater Chamber of Tallahassee just had their annual meeting just last weekend. So all of these kind of like annual meetings happen, and the audience at annual meetings tend to be very different than the audience that you're going to see on social media or on the other end of an email, right? Think about what you're doing at an annual meeting. You're usually sitting in a really big audience. There's a stage and there's two massive screens. What you need to shoot, what you need to create for that video to share an impact story is going to be very different from what you need to create if someone's scrolling on social media looking for and wanting to draw them in. So in thinking through how you want to use your video, you really want to consider that platform concept, because if you primarily are going to be streaming it on a very large screen, you definitely want to shoot your video this way. You want to consider probably investing in high definition video production because of where that's going to be. But if you're creating something that's going to live on YouTube and get linked to Twitter or Instagram or and we won't even talk about TikTok because that's a whole other video platform, you may want to consider shooting long ways if the idea is to do an appeal directly through your phone or on a social media feed. So all of that's really going to weigh into the kind of the type of video that you choose, and then that storyline and how long. The storyline should still be kind of that same where you draw them in. And probably one of the most important things that matters, no matter what platform you pick, no matter what form you pick, is that how you start matters, right? So a video testimonial at that fundraising lunch is very different from one that's on social media, but your goal is always going to be to retain your viewers. So that means, right, they're scrolling, you want them to stop and look and watch, or you're at an event and you want them to stop and look and watch, maybe even lean in to whatever you're communicating. But that's where you want to draw them in the first seconds. This is oftentimes why we have movie trailers, right? You want to kind of pack some stuff in before you actually show the whole thing. It's actually one of the tricks of the trade, even in like the when you go to the cinema to watch a film, they oftentimes start with like a clip before they even roll their opening credits. Like that was not the way it was done 30 years ago, right? Where you have all those things at the beginning, not to mention the ones at the end. So how you start matters. The first seconds to draw in your audience matters. I'll also kind of free bit of advice for those who like to just video record on social media or whatever it might be, is that if it's constantly just the face of someone, this next piece is going to, this next kind of tidbit should make you kind of think a little bit about that. And that is soundless optimization. Oftentimes people will create videos and it might be them like walking somewhere and they're just talking, right? And if you've ever seen this on someone's story, it might be 10 stories because they're only 10 seconds and they've talked for, a minute and a half and they're kind of streaming through. But like research is showing that many people on social media are not actually listening with the sound on. They turn down those speakers on the phone and they oftentimes are watching videos on mute. So you want to consider that. If you have this great impact story and it's just one person standing in front of the camera talking, what does that communicate? How does that communicate? Yes, you can utilize some easy ways to add text to it, but think through kind of visualizations. I think a great example recently was the Jumpstart to Success event. And they had a preview video that was posted, and they actually went on a tour of like, these are the things that you can come out and see. And so even if you had your phone on mute or your volume turned down, you see a couple of partners, you see some stuff, there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of activity, you would get the sense that something was about to happen even without listening. So that's something that you want to absolutely consider, especially for an impact story. So not only do the first seconds count, you've kind of got their attention, but how do you keep them visually engaged without sound, which of course brings us to visual interest. So again, this is going to be dependent upon your platform. You can utilize editing features on all sorts of video production apps. Some of them are right on your phone, especially like if you have an iPhone, you might have iMovie that's on there. There's some very cheap and some free tools that you can use to create videos. Or if you have access to a video production team, you might want to consider special effects, cool filters, any type of, and I know I said filters. I kind of joke around and say, the hashtag TikTok taught me. But that's a really great way, especially if you're considering a social media platform or a news feed as your delivery mechanism, is how can you create some of that visual interest so that your video is aesthetically pleasing. Again, you want to consider the where and the when before making your decision to add. Adding some of the TikTok filters may not be appropriate for your fundraising lunch, but might be absolutely appropriate for the purposes of sharing a story on social media. And with that, we are going to pause and take questions and answers.
So Holly, first of all, greetings everyone. So glad that you could join us. Holly, I think it would be important, well, let me start by saying, if you have never had anyone consult with you on branding, media, creating stories for the purposes of your fundraising, impact, all of that stuff, you just got it for free. Let me just say that. All of that information is very valuable information that PR companies charge a heck of a lot of money to provide. So that's number one. Number two, Holly, I'm going to ask you to go back, if you will, and make it really clear what we are requiring as a part of their final reporting. Because I think we may have a few of our partners that are not really sure what is it that we're asking, because we just gave them a lot of great information and they're trying to decipher it. That's all.
Absolutely. So as we discussed at our July training, your final report will need to include a testimonial story and at least 3 to 5 impactful photos. So that was the requirement, an impact story. We said that in thinking about that impact story, what should that look like? That's what this training was all about. So that kind of first 15 minutes of today's training of that story arc, who's the character, what was their conflict, like what were their goals, what was the conflict, how did they overcome it, and how did your organization provide that impact? So this was meant to be a technical assistance in thinking through how do you write an impact story. We recognize that all of our partners come from very different backgrounds and experiences. Some of you have probably been writing impact stories for quite some time, especially those of you who might be affiliated with a national model. You might have access to those PR firms that Fika was just talking about that can help you write them yourself. Others of you might be brand new to this. And so that's what today's training was, to help you kind of decipher, is that when thinking about an impact story, a success story, a testimonial, what does that look like? What are those components? And then the second piece of your final report for that requirement is images. So we talked again about that during the July training, is that you want to capture 3 high quality images of the summer programming and how it relates to your testimonial or your success story.
Perfect. We are going to open it up for questions, but I do want to provide just a little more context as to why we are asking you to provide this information. So when the council passed in 2020 and got up and running in May of 2021, it passed about 60-40, 63 something and 30 something. So more than half of our citizens that voted really thought this was a great idea, the council. And then there's another portion, anywhere from a third to a little bit more, that just didn't want another tax. Right? So the council has been very clear in wanting to paint a picture, illustrate, and very clearly show why the council was needed. And even though the funding that you received is one-time funding, was left wide open so that you would tell us what you would provide in concert with the outcomes that the key outcome measures that we're trying to achieve. We want to be able to clearly show the citizens of Leon County, the taxpayers, what was done with this infusion of $1.56 million into this summer programming. It's not enough to say that nearly 14,000 children, youth, and families were helped. You would think it would be, right? That would be, oh my gosh, that is so impactful. But I think that this allows us to really paint a picture of how this funding can help our children, youth, and families, so that they know it's not just another tax for tax sake. This is not a slush fund to just do the usual things and fund the usual suspects. This is about us using a different way and really being deliberative about how we try to move some outcomes for our children, youth, and families. So while most of our funding, we won't really see the benefit of it for about 3 to 5 years, depending on where it is invested, this funding that we provided to you this summer, by asking that you expand on a program that was already existing, is a very clear illustration of how more children, youth, and families were helped, even in a short period of time, such as the summer months. So that is why the impact story is important, not just giving us pictures with a caption, but rather giving us photos that depict the program that CSC helped to fund and what the outcome was, what the impact was, how that participant was changed, was helped, was assisted, was able to identify something going on that maybe he, she, or them didn't even know, and now are able to even work further toward that goal. So this is really about telling a story, not just showing the photo evidence, not just giving us a caption, but using that example and that formula that Holly gave you to create a story. Once upon a time, there was this girl named Sika Green, and her mind was all messed up, and she was referred to our program, met with our counselors, and was able to clearly identify what changes she needed to make to be able to move forward. So through using the evidence-based practice of, I don't know, I'm throwing this out here, feedback therapy and lots of chocolate, she was able on the other end to now know what her triggers were, how she needed to organize her day, what kind of job better fit with what she wanted to do in her education. And she is looking forward to this. We were able to do the same type of thing where we normally serve 30 people who are very similar to Sika. We were able to serve 50 people, basically do the same thing. And that is why this funding, in addition to all of our funding sources, made a difference this summer. Does that make sense? Make it a little clearer. And really, chocolate does help me focus better. That was not a stretch. Okay.
There was an additional question, Sika, that popped up regarding if you've already taken photos and they don't meet that. So I just want to reiterate something that Sika said. Although with that story, I could definitely see young Sika sitting on a couch with a box of chocolates. Like, I definitely think that that would be one of those ways that you can tie it together. So one of the questions is, like, if you've already taken the photos and you say that they don't meet the requirements, those were not requirements other than you need to have 3 high quality photos. They're not requirements. Those are ways that you can communicate impact. So as Sika kind of mentioned, some of that kind of PR tips and stuff of how you kind of should proceed. So keeping that in mind as we move forward, that's, as you as an organization moves forward, those are the ways that you create those are ways that you should create your visuals to really supercharge your stories. So we're not going to, other than we do not want 95 low quality photos, right? We want 3 to 5 high quality photos that enhance what your testimonial is about. Like, that's what we're looking for.
Right.
That of course is subjective. We're not going to send them back to you and say, this is an F, this is an A, this is a C. Like, we're not going to do that. But we want you to really be thinking about strategically, how does it best serve your organization? Those are the tips that we were providing. And again, just the stressing about the video, we are not asking for videos, but we wanted to extend this kind of TA opportunity to help you build your capacity if video production is something that you're interested in.
Right. So don't now panic and say, oh my gosh, the program's over, I didn't get the right pictures. No, look at the pictures you already have and pick the ones that best depict the program that you ran using CSC funding, and then create the story. Again, if the person in the story, I'm just throwing this out there, his name is Jane Doe, you don't have to use her name or his name or their name. You can use, I don't know, Tiana. You can use that or whatever that is, because we will definitely put in there that names have been changed to protect the people who participated in the program. And then you'll want to have any releases, and we will, we can send you an example of that. Or in the case of children, maybe you photograph them from the back. So don't panic and, oh, I don't have it right. Don't do that. If you happen to have a video, did a video, have the capability to do video production and want to send us like a 90-second clip that is fine. But it's not required. But I promise you, if you send it to us, we will figure out how to use it. Because there'll be an online version of the final report, and there'll be a way for us to use that as well. Yes, might not meet this requirement. Yes, okay.
So I don't see any additional questions in the chat currently. I do want to encourage you before leaving, if you have not already, to please drop your name and your organization in the chat. Especially, I mean, everyone I know registered, but just in case we don't connect your name to the organization, I'm pretty sure I recognize most of you, but there are 2 names on here that I'm like, I'm not quite sure what organization you're with. So if you have not yet done that, please do that before departing. And our team will stay on for a few more minutes if you have additional questions that you'd like to ask one-on-one. But with that, we will grant you the next 15 minutes. We're staying right on track with keeping our trainings 45 minutes. That's been our goal for each of these. So thank you for joining us. And if you have additional team members or you want to hear this information again, feel free to join us tomorrow at 10 a.m. Or this is on our YouTube channel and you can access it there. All right, guys, thank you very much.